For decades, horror has often been treated as something that must be overwhelming, a genre defined by suffocating dread, grotesque imagery, and the constant threat of death. But every so often a piece of media proves that fear doesn't always need to be brutal to be effective. Sometimes it can be playful, curious, and even a little bit charming, while still retaining the unmistakable DNA of horror. That's exactly the strange space that Luigi's Mansion occupies. On the surface, it looks like the most unlikely horror game imaginable. A nervous plumber with a vacuum cleaner wandering through a haunted house, designed with bright colors, exaggerated ghosts, and a distinctly cartoonish tone. Yet beneath that approachable exterior is something surprisingly authentic to the genre. The mansion itself is quiet, oppressive, and full of lingering uncertainty. Doors creak open into pitch-black rooms. Furniture rattles with unseen presence, and portraits stare from the walls like silent witnesses to something long forgotten. Luigi doesn't stride confidently through these halls. He tiptoes, shaking and muttering to himself, his flashlight cutting fragile beams through darkness that always feels slightly too deep. The result is a form of horror that doesn't try to dominate the player, because unlike the hardened protagonists of most horror video games and stories, Luigi embodies pure vulnerability, wide-eyed, trembling, audibly frightened by the very environment he is forced to explore. Yet that fear he feels and shows never becomes despair. The tools he carries, from his flickering flashlight to the iconic poltergust, transforms encounters within the supernatural into something closer to a cautious dance than a desperate fight for survival. It's horror stripped of cruelty, but not of tension. A world where the unknown still lurks behind every door, yet the experience remains playful enough to invite curiosity instead of dread. That delicate balance is what defines Gentle Terror, a haunted space that feels eerie without becoming oppressive. Eerie enough to spark the imagination, but warm enough that stepping into the darkness never feels like a mistake. From the very first moment Luigi steps through the gates in Luigi's Mansion, the game begins establishing a tone that feels fundamentally different from the bombastic and playful and high-octane energy usually associated with other Super Mario games. Instead of cheerful overworlds and lively music, the player is greeted with an unnervingly quiet estate sitting alone in the darkness. The mansion itself appears suddenly, when none existed before. An unnatural structure looming under a perpetual night sky, already framing the experience through the lens of mystery rather than spectacle. The front door creaks open with an exaggerated slowness. The interior halls stretch outward in dim candlelight that barely reach the walls. Even before encountering a single ghost, the player is made aware that this place does not belong to the world they are used to seeing Luigi inhabit. The mansion feels sealed away from reality, almost like a pocket of haunted stillness that exists solely for Luigi to wander through. It is this deliberate isolation that lays the groundwork for the game's softer horror identity. Nothing here is overtly violent or grotesque, but everything carries the quiet suggestion that something is wrong. What makes this atmosphere particularly effective is how the game communicates unease through environmental pacing rather than aggressive scares. Doors do not burst open dramatically, they slowly swing inward as Luigi hesitates at the threshold. Rooms are rarely chaotic, instead feeling abandoned and untouched, as though the ghosts living within them have grown accustomed to the silence. The lighting plays a crucial role in maintaining this mood. Luigi's flashlight becomes the player's primary way of navigating darkness, its narrow beam revealing furniture piece by piece rather than illuminating entire spaces at once. Shadows stretch across the walls while distant creaks echo through the mansion's corridors. It creates a constant impression that something could emerge from anywhere at any time. Yet, the game never pushes this tension into outright dread. Instead, it lets the player sit within a low hum of uncertainty, turning exploration into a slow, cautious process where curiosity and anxiety exist side by side. The mansion is not terrifying in the traditional sense, but it is undeniably eerie, and that restrained approach is precisely what allows the game's gentle terror to take root. Another subtle but important detail is how the mansion feels intentionally still. almost as if time itself has slowed within its walls. Dusty rooms remain frozen in half-finished moments, a dinner table prepared but never eaten from, books left open mid-page, instruments resting in silent anticipation of music that never returned. These environmental details quietly imply that the mansion is not just haunted by ghosts, but by the lingering presence of lives that once lived here. Luigi's slow progress through these very spaces feels less like invading a hostile territory and more like walking through an abandoned memory. The tension arises not from immediate danger, but from the haunting question of what exactly happened within these walls. That curiosity drives the player and Luigi forward, creating an atmosphere where the fear is never overwhelming, but always present enough to make every new room feel like a discovery wrapped in uncertainty. A large part of why Luigi's Mansion succeeds in this unusual tonal space comes down to Luigi himself. Unlike the confident heroes that typically populate action-heavy adventures, Luigi is visibly and audibly terrified of everything around him. His body language constantly betrays his fear. He shuffles forward with hesitant steps, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting something to grab him from behind at any moment. His breathing grows shaky whenever the lights dim, and his voice trembles as he nervously calls out for his missing brother. These small character details completely transform how the player experiences the mansion. Instead of feeling like an unstoppable force, clearing rooms of enemies, the player inhabits someone who genuinely does not want to be there. Luigi's reluctance becomes the emotional lens through which the entire haunted house is viewed. Every creak of the floorboards feels more unsettling because Luigi reacts to it as a frightened person would. This vulnerability is also what prevents the game's ghost encounters from becoming straightforward action sequences. When Luigi confronts spirits throughout the mansion, the process never feels like a tool, but rather a nervous struggle to maintain control of the situation. The poltergeist vacuum may be a creative tool, but using it always feels slightly chaotic as ghosts resist capture and pull Luigi across the room. The player is constantly managing Luigi's footing, positioning and balance while the ghost attempts to break free, turning each encounter into a tug of war rather than a traditional battle. This mechanical design reinforces Luigi's role as an unwilling participant. He is not here to conquer the mansion, he is simply trying to survive it long enough to rescue Mario. That dynamic transforms what could have been a simple ghost-catching gimmick into something far more atmospheric. Luigi's fear becomes the player's fear, grounding the game's gentle terror in a protagonist who embodies uncertainty rather than bravery. What makes Luigi especially effective in this role is that his fear never feels exaggerated for comedic effect alone. Instead, it feels believable within the strange circumstances he has been placed in. Luigi's not a trained ghost hunter or an action hero. He is an ordinary character thrust into a supernatural problem far beyond anything he has ever been prepared to handle. That contrast creates a constant sense of emotional authenticity throughout the entire experience. When Luigi hesitates before opening a door, or nervously hums to himself while walking through a dark corridor, those behaviors of his reinforce the idea that he is coping with fear rather than overcoming it entirely. In many ways, Luigi behaves exactly how most people actually would behave in a haunted mansion, cautiously, anxiously, and always hoping the next room will be slightly less terrifying than the last. The ghosts inhabiting Luigi's Mansion are another key reason the game manages to feel eerie without ever becoming oppressive. Rather than functioning as monstrous threats designed purely to attack the player, the spirits of the mansion behave more like strange inhabitants who have grown comfortable living in their own haunted routines. Many of them appear engaged in everyday activities when Luigi first encounters them, reading books, lifting weights, playing instruments, or quietly rocking in chairs as though time has simply stopped for them. These moments create a bizarre sense of domesticity within the supernatural setting. The ghosts are not lurking in darkness waiting to ambush Luigi, they are living within the mansion as if it was their own personal home. Luigi's arrival interrupts that calm, forcing the spirits to react with annoyance or curiosity rather than genuine hostility. This subtle characterization gives the mansion a strange personality, making it feel less like a dungeon and more like a haunted community frozen in time. Because of this approach, ghost encounters often feel closer to puzzles than fights. Luigi must observe their behavior, figure out how to disrupt their routines, and reveal their vulnerable moments before capturing them. This process encourages players to pay attention to the environment and the ghosts themselves, transforming each single room into a miniature story rather than just a simple combat arena. Some spirits are vain performers, who only expose themselves when admired, while others are distracted gluttons or stubborn guardians clinging to objects from their past lives. By giving each ghost a distinct personality, the game reinforces the idea that the mansion is filled with lingering echoes of lives that once existed. It softens the horror without eliminating the uncanny feeling that comes from interacting with beings that should not still be present. The result is a haunting that feels strangely intimate, unsettling enough to maintain tension, but whimsical enough to keep the experience playful. This design choice subtly shifts the player's relationship with ghosts from adversarial to observational. Rather than simply defeating them, the player spends time watching their habits, learning their quirks, and understanding what makes them react. Each encounter becomes less about eliminating a threat and more about unraveling a tiny character study hidden within the haunted house. In this way, the ghosts contribute to the mansion's identity as a place shaped by personalities rather than danger. They are strange, sometimes mischievous, occasionally intimidating, but rarely malicious in a way that feels genuinely cruel. This delicate balance keeps the mansion feeling lively even as it remains haunted, reinforcing the game's central tone of gentle terror. A world where the supernatural is eerie, unpredictable, and occasionally frightening, but never truly monstrous. More than 2 decades after its release, Luigi's Mansion still stands as one of the most unique interpretations of horror ever produced by a major developer. While many games in the genre strive to push players towards extremes of fear, Luigi's Mansion takes the opposite path, embracing restraint as its defining strength. The mansion is undeniably haunted, filled with ghosts, shadows, and lingering mysteries, yet the experience never loses its sense of charm. Luigi's constant nervousness, the whimsical personalities of the spirits, and the mansion's eerie but inviting atmosphere combine to create a version of horror that feels accessible without being trivial. It proves that fear does not need to be overwhelming to be memorable. Sometimes the quietest hauntings leave the strongest impressions. This is why the game endures not only as a beloved entry within the broader Super Mario franchise, but also as a rare example of horror that understands the value of softness. The terror found within the mansion is never cruel, never oppressive, and never designed to push players away. Instead, it gently pulls them deeper into its strange little world, encouraging them to explore every hallway and uncover every ghostly secret hidden behind its doors. That balance between eeriness and warmth is incredibly difficult to achieve, yet Luigi's Mansion manages it effortlessly, and in doing so, it manages to carve out a space in the horror genre that few other games have ever attempted to occupy. It is a game in which a space where fear is not something to endure, but something to quietly appreciate. It is horror at its most welcoming, a haunted house that invites players inside not to frighten them away, but to show them just how charming a ghost story can truly be.